And if you stay in the mist, you gon' be soaked. So listen up, cause this hair of the dog, what's real, what ain't? Is this the fog or smog? Cause there's a difference when you breathe it in. So don't let the corporate media take you for a spin. This that morning show, they put you in the know. So I hope that you ready, cause all we do is go, go, go. Yeah, come get your info, you gon' be like, whoa. Hair of the dog, we bout that, ayy. We in the zone, we out here, yeah. Spitting the facts.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Friday, and this is Hair of the Dog, your cure for the neoliberal hangover on the DLF platform. So this morning, we have lost Andy Kennedy to the wilds of Canada. His internet is a little bit choppy this morning, so he may join us a little later, not sure. But I am so delighted to have with me today our special guest. She's been on the show before. We did a full-on interview. Wonderful writer, great blogger for Endemic Times, and this is Amira Napier. Amira, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Carrie. I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Now, you're joining us from Colorado, right?
Yes, Colorado.
So thank you for getting up a little early and doing this show. So if people who are watching, you can weigh in live on this conversation. We can see the comments and questions that come in. Also on the tag for today, I have a link to Amira's post. This is about the WAP, the song that came out by Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion. We had a couple different programs that related to this, but as always, a delight has been Ben Shapiro, the right, weighing in on this. So, Amira, what were your initial thoughts at seeing Ben Shapiro, the bastion of sexuality, weighing in on this particular genre of music, this song?
Oh, Ben. That was my very, first headline of my piece was Ben Shapiro being Ben Shapiro. I thought it was very like how a high schooler almost would approach this kind of lyric and music video that they're watching. It just seemed kind of childish and immature. But at the same time, I was also watching it and a little bit concerned. I was like, this is a grown man with a decent platform who, yes, has a very conservative view on the world, but he's not alone. And so I wanted to kind of see how does this work? What is this view in this conservative realm? And it was definitely very eye-opening. I felt that it was there were some points that I'm like, I can understand. These are lyrics that are very salacious. They're raunchy. They're not the best thing in the world. But at the same time, I kept going back to this freedom of expression and how do we want to, moving forward, with everything we have going on when it comes to censorship. We've got it on YouTube, we've got it on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. I just didn't want this to turn into something to where women with a platform that is very difficult to obtain, women of color that are expressing themselves, how is this going to be for women moving forward when we're 100 years from the 19th Amendment, allowing women to vote, and how far have we really come?
Exactly. And I definitely want to get on the topic of the 19th Amendment just for a second as a tangent, because I think it speaks to everything, not just sexuality, but the way that women are viewed, especially, and you mentioned it, women of color. So one of the points that I come back to when women suffragettes were struggling to get the right to vote is there was an interesting partnership, an allyship that developed because of the way that we see segments of the population. And what I'm referring to specifically is when white women allied with racists in order to get the vote, right? So we know now from history what the white suffragettes kind of threw their counterparts, women of color, under the bus, hoping to, forward a goal that, even to this day, we still do not have parity when it comes to voting rights. So Do you think Ben was focusing more on Cardi B as a strong woman of color, on Megan as a strong woman of color, or it was just women across the board should not speak like this, behave like this, whatever? Did you get any bit of that take from the counterpoints that were coming from the right?
Yeah, I definitely got this sense of we want women to have these freedoms, to have freedom and rights and expression and things like that, but only in certain ways. And this was a way that was looked at as being inappropriate. It was too vulgar, it was too sexual, it was just too, I almost felt like too feminine, because this is a purely female video. There's no male presence. It's owning your person, your sexuality, your independence, what you want, what you don't want, which I think is a really important conversation for young girls and women to be having, because that's not a conversation I think a lot of us had when we were younger, of how to approach sex, your sexuality, the, discussion of consent and what does that mean and how does that work. There's a lot of different elements going on, but going back to your question of, do I think that Ben is wanting to kind of regulate the way that women speak? I think so. I think that's where it is. I think he's wanting to be as woke as he can and as progressive as he can from his conservative side, but I think he's still wanting to say this is okay, but this is not. And so part of me was like, well, what was your take when Christina Aguilera did Dirty? Where was what was your take when Britney Spears did Toxic? Because those at the time were looked at as being very, like, oh my gosh, what's happening? And these were young women turning into adult women that are obviously going to go through that change that all women do, of just kind of owning their sexuality and their being. And it's, how do we want to approach that? Do we want to relegate it to the side? And when it comes to Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion, when they have something like this that definitely hits on a lot of buttons, and I kind of think that was the point. Where do we want to place them? And I'm not saying that, every girl should watch this and be perfectly fine with it. It's one of those things of, if you want to watch it, you can watch it. And if you don't like it, you don't have to look at it.
Right. I think watching the video, maybe I'm making more of it than what there was, but one of the elements that they put into the video that I really enjoyed was, you have the two central characters, Cardi and Megan, walking down a hallway looking into these rooms, and each one of the rooms is a persona of themselves kind of living out a taboo, a fantasy in a sexualized nature. But the two central characters walking down the hall kind of personify us, because both of them looked nervous and intimidated and afraid. And at the end of the video, they do this wonderful thing where they just turn around and run away, flustered, that kind of pearl clutching thing. And that final note, I think, on culture really made me laugh out loud, because I got what they were trying to do. So from the perspective of sexuality, I think it's interesting that we all kind of wear a mask, right? So Ben unfortunately outed himself, right? He's got this persona mask of being a straight shooter and all of this, and then we find out that maybe his sexual prowess is not what it should be, because his own wife is telling him things that simply aren't true about female biology. So
Yeah.
so I think, I wonder that we don't all have kind of that hidden persona, the things that we do in the privacy that we don't want people to know, and that's where the discomfort comes from.
I would definitely agree. I think that there's a lot that people want to keep hidden in the shadows and the dark recesses of our minds and stuff like that. I think that that's where the danger comes in, because when you don't acknowledge something that's very prominent and very prevalent in a society, it's going to lead to systemic issues. And we can see this. I'm not going to list that. There's a multitude of things that you can say come from different ways that we relegate either people or certain aspects of perception and thinking and things like that. I think that the biggest thing is really trying to work on acceptance of it may not be for you, but it is for that person. If they're not harming you physically in any way, it shouldn't be radicalized, I think. And I think that just acknowledging the fact that, everyone has something that they like, that they do keep in, behind those closed doors, and that's perfectly fine. For me, I'm not saying like, everything needs to be put out on the table and everyone needs to, express everything all of the time. There's professionalism. We have to be able to communicate with one another, and going streaking every day, even if that's your belief, might lead to some interesting issues. But I think it's just trying to not sensationalize sex in such a way that makes it uncomfortable for people to talk about, because it does need to be talked about. There's a lot of things about sex and sexual health that we're still grappling with in this country today that I think are hindered because of the people's really wanting to not go there when it comes to sex.
Well, okay, so in your article, you put up some of the tweets that were the conversations that were happening, especially on the right, and it all went back to, well, these women have daddy issues. So in my mind, it's you have the hierarchy of needs, right? These are known things: shelter, food, water, and then sex is in there. So are we not denying personhood for women when we deny the equality of sexuality for women?
I would say yes. I think that there's a lot to be said about how we look at women and whether or not we want to accept their personhood. And I don't want to lose track of my thought. I'm getting close now. But one of the biggest things when it came to this daddy issue comment, it is a very common one to be said. I've pretty much heard it my entire life. It coincides with, oh, she's got daddy issues. Oh, her skirt was too short. She was asking for it. It goes into kind of some of the really negative rape culture aspects that we have. And that's my concern when James Bradley said that in his tweet about these daddy issue complexes, because I'm tired of that argument. I think that there's tons of women that go into the sex trade, if that's what you want to call it. And I'm not saying that there aren't issues within that realm. There's millions of issues that are going on. Safety, health, sexually transmitted diseases, violence, and things like that. Those are serious things that do need to be addressed. But I think trying to say that, oh, a woman becomes a stripper or becomes a prostitute because she doesn't have a dad around is just a very tired argument. I don't think it has a lot of weight. There's lots of women that haven't had father figures in their lives, and they've just had regular jobs. There's girls that have had fathers in their lives, be them positive or negative influences, that still do this. It is a lucrative business. A woman can make a lot of money using her moxie, using her wiles. And when it comes to the ability for women to obtain income, prostitution has been the number one thing on the list for such a long time, because women weren't able to get regular jobs. So they had to kind of rely on themselves, literally, to financially take care of themselves. And if they were a woman that had either children or a family to support, it's kind of like, what are they supposed to do? If we don't have any other protections for people, if we don't have a minimum standard of living like UBI and Medicare for all, that's ultimately where so many of these issues are coming from. It's not about not having a father figure. It's about the fact that your society isn't providing you with a base to come up from if you're struggling. and then we criminalize it and we ostracize those women. They might as well have an A on their head like the Scarlet Letter. It's just, it's a frustrating ass time.
No, I understand completely. And when you talk about it from a professional standpoint, right? So we know that Cardi B, she did start in the adult entertainment industry. And there's a reason why this industry is a billion-dollar industry. And if you go out to, every year Pornhub comes out with their statistics on who's actually consuming it. And we can see quite clearly that even in these southern evangelical states, they have quite a following. So somebody is actually consuming this. So I think, again, it goes back to the taboo of what we're talking about. But you brought up an interesting point about women, especially today with technology. We have the rise of an entire industry of personal pages. I forget the exact term, but where they have adult content or provocative images that is for their members only pages. That's what it is.
Yes. Yeah.
So this is a way that technology is kind of bridging that gap between service and consumer. And I would say that that is probably one of the most empowering things, that a woman can make the decision. She controls the content, she controls the audience, she controls access. She is taking all of the revenue for herself and making a good living off it. So that to me is free market enterprise, isn't it?
It is. And I think that that's the really important piece that I think people don't want to kind of talk about. What happens when women are able to own that, to have that control, decide what they want, who they want to do it with, what their prices are going to be, and can create their own business, essentially? You don't have any power over them. They've built their own power. They've created that power. And I think it's that dynamic that when you look at the male sphere, and I'm going to generalize that. I'm not saying all men in any, I'm saying there's a huge population of men that I think are very threatened by women, whether it's a conscious or subconscious thing. It's there, it's palpable. I've experienced it myself, where even in a professional management, meeting, the men just get really concerned when the women are strategizing, coming up with the ideas, and they're like, okay, we're going to do this, we'll get these teams together. There is a sense of, oh my gosh, well, where do I fit in? And I think that's the dynamic for men, especially in our society right now, that scares them. They're like, well, where do I fit in? If women get equality, where do I go? And it's like, that's the perception I think that needs to be changed. When women are empowered, when women have real equal rights, it starts to trickle to everyone, because I would say the majority of women, the majority of people want everyone to kind of be taken care of on like at least a minimum base level. And I think that it's when kind of these old hat politicians, kind of I picture the Mitch McConnells of the world, I think are just a little scared when women own themselves, their personhood, and are able to provide for themselves. And the fact that it's done in a sexual way, I think is just really off-putting for them. I'm not saying that that's not normal. That is normal. I completely understand that. Everyone's sexuality is different. It's just it's that power dynamic that kind of just keeps coming back into my head of, I feel like this is a way to keep women down. It's, by acknowledging your sexuality, it means you acknowledge your individuality of this, don't need a man, and men love to make that argument. But it's just, women should feel empowered to do whatever the hell they want to do, quite frankly.
Right, and you brought up two points that I want to get to, and I think they're really important. But real quick, I want to give a shout out to Mike and to Sherry, who are weighing in here. And Mike actually brought up a good point here: is what's the difference between a sex worker and a coal miner? Both are selling your time and body for some specific purpose, and I think that that's a valid point. But there are two things that you touched on. I think scarcity of resources, this perception of
Mhm.
scarcity that kind of instills the competition, right? So
Mhm.
and then the politics of it. So one example that I think encapsulates both is during the Obama administration, you had women in the cabinet and other people who were advising the administration who they themselves were finding that their opinions and input was being diminished. So they came up with something called the shine principle. And what this was is if I was in a cabinet meeting and I made a suggestion or a comment, then the woman on the other side of the table or other on would raise up what I had just said and come back and acknowledge it. So if I said, you know, we need to do X, Y, and Z, then the woman sitting next to me would go, and to Carrie's point on X, Y, and Z, I think that that's a valid thing. So it would just raise that opinion and point yet again so that it was addressed. So here, the shine principle was women recognizing that it was happening even in the left space, in a leftist administration,
Mhm.
but the necessity of it. So it's not necessarily a right or left thing, although it's totally fun to make fun of Ben Shapiro. This is
Hero.
right. It's happening everywhere. And this is something that, for example, daddy issues. My favorite political, I think, example here is Brock Turner. Brock Turner is Boys Will Be Boys. And when it came out of his rape of this woman, they put his swimming scores in the article. Now, they didn't talk about the woman who had been drugged, or I forget whether she was drugged or intoxicated, but either way, she was not able to consent. And so in the defense of it is, well, Brock's got a career and he's got all of these things, and boys will be boys. His father even said boys will be boys. And the reason that Brock, in my mind, correct me if I'm wrong, somebody, but in my mind, the reason why Brock Turner did not face as severe charges as he should have is because his uncle, Mike Turner, is a state representative of Ohio and buddy with everybody in California. So here and again, you have somebody who is not held accountable, but yet women are. In that particular case, it was, well, this woman should have done X, Y, and Z, not that Brock shouldn't have raped her.
Yeah.
Right. So
It's always on the women. It's always on them to have done better, to have said something more clear. Don't drink. You know, maybe you just shouldn't have had a drink. Maybe you should have had more girlfriends with you. It's that one of the things I always think about is the Welcome to Hell SNL skit. People haven't seen that. You need to go see it because it really encapsulates a lot of this conversation about just sex and rape culture. Brock Turner is a unfortunate but really great example of how this system has worked for so long. I mean, that was in, what was it, 2017?
yeah, he's getting out of probation and all of it. He will be done with it. Now he will still have to
Yeah.
register as a sex offender, but that's
And if his uncle is a representative in Ohio, I'm sure someone will be more than happy to just say, "Oh, we'll just pretend like this isn't there. Come on, you can join our board or something." And that's where the privilege aspect comes in. I mean, there's a lot of different elements when it comes to how women are treated, when it comes to them finally coming forward, if they do, when it comes to rape. Only 6% of rape allegations and things like that actually go to prison. Like only 6% of rapists go to prison. Over 68% of rapes will never be reported. And I think that that's a really important thing for us to remember when we look at these statistics of the fact that if 68% of rapes are not being reported, there is a huge population of women and men that are not reporting these crimes that are happening to them. And I personally have where every single person has either been sexually assaulted or raped. It was one of the hardest moments I've ever had of just sitting in a room and seeing 10 women just talk about their experiences. This is a really insidious thing in our culture. The way that we talk about women when it comes to rape and the depictions of them in the media, the Brock Turner case and how, oh, she shouldn't have gotten inebriated and things like that. It's putting too much on women to having to regulate themselves, where men just get to run amok. It's kind of how it feels. And so I think that that's where we really need to change that part of the conversation of that guy shouldn't have done that, and he should have been taught better. He should have understood what consent was. He should have understood that what he was doing was rape. Because I don't think a lot of guys, like that guy mentality, I think they're just not informed. And that's where we really, I think as women, we need to empower each other. We need to support each other, speak up for each other. But we also need to speak up about the men that are suffering from rape as well.
Mm-hmm.
And also that if we see something, we need to say something. We do need to call it out. And I think guys need to do the same thing too. Men need to hold each other accountable and not let each other catcall women or try to take advantage of a young girl who's maybe had a little too much to drink, and know that you can't take advantage of that.
So, all right. So my question to you, this is kind of a long, convoluted question, but who is responsible for teaching our kids about consent and sexuality? For example, one of the things that came out during this pandemic, COVID, and the push to reopen schools was a lot of school systems, superintendents, teachers, men and women in charge made the distinction, particularly in the Georgia school district, where they said we can't force kids to wear masks. We can't force that. However, remember our dress code, where girls need to be wearing skirts and shorts that go down to their knee, cannot wear spaghetti straps, you can't show your shoulders, can't do all of this sort of thing, and we will enforce that, but not, so
life-saving masks.
right. So when we have administrators, these are highly educated professional people making the distinction between, well, a mask, yeah, we can't do that. However, girls have to do this, this, and this.
Yes.
Does that play?
That's a really good point. It always seems to go back to women. It's like, well, we can control the women because we can't control the men, is kind of where my head goes when it comes to that. The dress code thing, when it comes to masks, I have two sisters, they're teachers, and of course it's just a stressful time right now regardless. And I think this whole like debate about masks and no masks and things like that, the administrators need to be professional. They need to be the educated, professional people that they are, and take the stand and say, no, we are going to regulate that you need to have a mask on. Because if you're going to regulate the length of a girl's skirt, then you should be able to say, we're going to require masks. Going back to what you first said about like who should be teaching these boys and also girls about all of this, it's a culmination of pretty much every aspect of our society. So parents need to be, of course, the first and foremost thing when it comes to teaching their children about, just the different sexes, like, male, female, LGBTQ, all of those things, I think at a younger age, just so that kids learn about acceptance. Then it also does need to come from the educational institutions. And I know it gets into a touchy subject because there's people with, very strong religious beliefs that don't believe that schools should, talk about sex. They shouldn't, talk about safe sex.
Title 10.
Things like that.
I happen to live in a Title 10 county where they are not allowed to teach anything about sex education. And we have actually declined federal funds to maintain that status here. So yeah, big deal.
And it's unfortunate because when you go into the aspect of talking about sex, you can talk about then sexual health and understanding the very serious concerns that people have when it comes to sexually transmitted diseases, and also the fear aspect. I think women are not necessarily taught how dangerous it can be for girls and young women, any women really. I think that needs to be something that is taught to young girls and to young women. I think boys need to be taught more about understanding, their sexuality. Girls understand their sexuality, and to not make it into something where it's like, I remember like in grade school when we were learning about puberty, and you watch the videos and things like that, and there's always a lot of giggling. And because girls will start puberty at totally different ranges of ages, they have experiences where if they're menstruating and they have an issue, they then get made fun of. If people see it, boys will be boys and will make fun of them. It's that aspect in the educational sphere that I think really does need to be looked at. Teachers need to be involved, administrators, principals, vice principals. It's just like the bullying conversation of, if you see it, you need to do something about it. And I think the more that we have those conversations, we bring it in as a nonchalant, it's not a big deal. I think it will help to reduce the ick factor and the shy factor and the shame factor, especially for girls that are going through such a difficult transition. I mean, I know personally it was so difficult. I started so much earlier than all of the rest of the girls, and so you have these body parts and you're just like, what's happening right now?
Right.
And so just having those resources for young people, and to not make it into something funny. And then we also need the politicians to stop politicizing sex, and to, and then with the rape culture aspect, attorneys can be vicious in the courtroom. And I think that, shaming a victim, a woman or a man who has come forward, there's so little percentages of things being found to be, fake allegations, that I wish that kind of argument would just go away, because it's like 2 to 8% of allegations are found to be false. That because one of the things that comes up is people want to say, oh, well, maybe she's making it up. She wants attention, or he wants to be in the limelight or anything like that. Who wants that? No one wants to be in the forefront right now of this conversation, because you do get attacked, you do get antagonized, and people want to blame you and shame you. There's a lot of different people that I think need to be involved, but it really comes from parents, educational institutions, and the media also really needs to get their heads in a different sphere, with how
you
they
said that
depict-
so politely.
Yeah,
I appreciate that. Get their heads out of their asses is really.
Yeah.
So I want to back up a little bit, because Mike put in a comment here, and I'm going to phrase it in the form of a question. So we're putting all of this emphasis on educating women and girls and things like this. Do you think that the boys will be boys, and the focus on women and what we're wearing and all of these sort of things actually diminishes men, as if men are incapable of controlling themselves? Doesn't this bring a young boy, an elementary student, down to the level of basically a dog who cannot control themselves? So
Yes, that's exactly true. And I think that it does disempower men. And I think that that's why the argument of, when women try to talk about equality, why men are, might have that tizzy moment of like, oh, you're equal, you can vote, you're fine. Or they get this feeling of, well, if you're empowered, then I'm disempowered. And I do think that Mike is definitely onto something. There is a lot to be said about, oh, we're going to regulate women and what they wear because men just can't control themselves. Well, if we give men, young boys, the tools, the resources, and if we also allow them to feel, if we allow them to have emotions, if they want to cry, let them cry. If they want to yell and scream, let them yell and scream. It's the same thing for girls. I think girls get put into a box of, you have to be dainty, pretty, don't overreact, don't raise your voice. It's definitely a very similar thing that both men and women are being dealt a hand right now. I do think that we need to acknowledge that boys are just as in the headspace of thinking about girls or thinking about boys. The same thing for girls. They're thinking about boys or they're thinking about girls, depending on where they are. And just realizing that we need to empower them to feel accepted, that the way that they're feeling is completely normal, to have these emotional roller coasters is normal, but to help give them the tools in the toolbox to learn better skills of, hey, stop giggling at that girl who's, maybe her nipples are showing through her shirt because she doesn't have a bra, because she doesn't have one yet. It's a new thing for her. And rather than saying, oh, she needs to go and put, a big hoodie on, just get the boys to learn to control themselves, learn some better social skills. So I think Mike is really on the money. We've got to stop acting like men can't do anything other than like be some, dog that can't control themselves. They definitely can. I've met a lot of emotionally sensitive men, and also overly aggressive women, if that's what you want to call it. There's a whole host and range of people. I think we just need to have better tools. And it starts at that young age in schools, at home, and what they're consuming when it comes to social media and movies and TV shows, giving people those better tools so that they have a full toolbox as they're becoming an adult and can better address the more serious situations that come up.
Okay, perfect. So my question for you, and this is like the $64,000 question, is I view feminism as my ability to make a choice, whether I want to be a homemaker, a wife, a mother, if I want to, whatever I want to do is okay because I get to make that choice and can pursue it that way. That's how I see feminism. Would you agree? Because I keep hearing that feminism ruined women in marriage and all of these other things. So what exactly is feminism?
I think feminism is just that, having the right to choose what you want to do, what kind of woman you want to be. If you want to be a homemaker, I think that that's a really admirable thing. I think for a lot of people right now, we feel like we're homemakers because we're home all of the time. And there's a lot to be said to the beauty that is, a stay-at-home mom or a stay-at-home dad. I think that it's something that's not appreciated enough in our society because, especially as, feminists, I think a lot of feminists want to say, well, if you're at home, then you don't have the ability to do what you want and be who you want and things like that. I fully agree with that. If you want to be a homemaker, if you believe in, pro-life, I'm all for it. My thing is don't take your personal views and then put them on someone else. And I think that feminists do have to have that conversation. We need to be accepting of there's going to be women that they want to be a mom, they want to stay at home, and they want to build that family unit. And that's a really important thing. It kind of goes back to a tribal aspect that we've kind of missed, I think, over the last several 100 years, just because everyone has moved and people aren't able to have kids as much now, especially millennials. No money, no jobs, can't buy a house. But there's a lot to be said about creating that home and creating that family dynamic. And then there's also a lot to be said about women that don't want to have kids and they want to be a professional and they career is very important for them. We need to be accepting of all of that and enjoy what is a woman, what is man, what is anybody. There's a beautiful spectrum of colors out there. And my whole thing is just accept people as they are. If they're not hurting you, it's okay.
What a unique concept. And Mike did weigh in and he said your answer about the status quo bad for everyone. He absolutely loved that. So I wanted to share that with you. But so real quick in the last few minutes, let's get to the religion part of it. We were talking before and I did not want this to be a religious argument, but we can't help it because people are making this a religious argument. Now, for those who don't know, I am a rabid Catholic, absolutely 100%. However, that's my choice for me, as Amira, you were just talking about. I put myself under obedience to the rules of my faith, but I don't have authority to put you under that, um, under those guidelines. So when we have people from the right who are trying to do just that, to subjugate others to the rules that they themselves have voluntarily subscribed to, is this not something that isn't necessarily religious, but going back to the culture of divide and conquer and the whole fallacy of limited resources? Isn't that actually what this is about, not necessarily religion, or do I have it wrong?
I think there's a lot to be said to the conversation of limited resources. I think that's why it leads to this world that we're in, this power dynamic of, like you said, divide and conquer. It's, I want to be on top. So in order to do that, I need to denigrate and downgrade these people over here. And that is, it's an unfortunate dynamic we've had for a really, really long time. And it's also come from, when we look historically at religions, I mean, we can talk about the Crusades, we can even talk about the Ottoman Empire, we can talk about, even before the Abrahamic times, there's a lot of, archaeologists continue to do a lot of research and studying when it comes to like ancient civilizations and things like that. There's a lot about the world we do not know, and there's a lot about our history that we do not know. Religion has been a way of, I think, trying to understand it, trying to understand where we come from and what we are and things like that. I don't ascribe to a particular religion, but I accept them, and I really love learning about all of them, and I love having conversations with people of faith because it's always very heartening to see, because I think the media, when it comes to talking about people of religious faith, want to kind of go to the extremes. So they'll depict the extremes of that religion and not really talk about the everyday person that's like, hey, I'm over here baking cookies for my grandma because she's having a bad day, or, oh, our entire community just got flooded and we want to make sure they have a safe place to go. There's a lot to be said about having a church, having a community. And I think it's something that a lot of us lack, especially if, for myself, I'm a spiritual person, but I don't go to a specific religion. And I have found that kind of hard to find a support group, because there's people that want to either be an extreme atheist, extremely religious, and not listen and, not accept, what I got to give, kind of thing. And so the religious part of it is understandable because I came from a religious area, very small town, very conservative. Religion was a huge part of that community, and it really created that sense of community. But the understanding and acceptance of just different people there were definitely some issues there. And then also just the understanding about, sex. It's such a taboo in so many different parts of religious practice. And it's, for me, I'm like, I get that you want to, abstain from sex until you're married and things like that. That's a really beautiful thing. My thing is that we have a whole society and culture that surrounds that religion, and you need to be understanding of that. You need to have the knowledge, and you need to have the tools in how to deal with that society, because you're not always going to be in the safest place. You're not always going to be around the best people. And so I think for anyone, regardless of their faith affiliation, just understanding that right now, this is what our society looks like. It's really dangerous for women to be out by themselves. Mm-hmm. There's a predatory nature going on. And so just trying to be accepting of that, bring people into the fold as much as you can, have as many conversations as you can, and try to not sensationalize too much, because I think that's also what gets off-putting for a lot of people. And that's really the importance of this WAP music video. I think it sensationalized and definitely was, very in your face about a lot of things, but at the same time, it kind of needs to happen. happen.
Oh, absolutely. And what you said it so eloquently. And we've got to remember that this particular genre is an art form, and that is what art is supposed to do. And then getting back to, part of respect for religion and culture and all of these sort of things, I think Ben Shapiro himself has made the best argument for even our evangelical, our deeply religious, our people who vehemently believe that it should be abstinence still can benefit from a little biology education because Ben himself
Yes.
still as a married man doesn't understand how female biology actually works. So that can cause problems across a society, especially when we have younger people. Like I literally heard, and I've heard this a couple times, people make the comment that, well, I didn't think I could get pregnant because I had sex at night and sperm sleep. No. So,
I've never heard that. That's so unfortunate.
right. And it goes back to education. We need to, in all aspects, it comes down to a fundamental education, like you said, setting aside the giggle and the things that are uncomfortable and just getting to the facts of the matter. So,
Mhm.
one of the things that I am looking at critically now in our political sphere, when we talk about the idea of limited resources, we're now hearing the Biden campaign. Some of his staffers are talking about austerity, that the federal funds because of COVID are drying up and this sort of thing. And some of the very first programs that take a hit besides social welfare are in education and women's programs.
Mhm.
So just real quick before we get out of here, because we're kind of running out of time, looking forward now, when it comes to feminism and the things that are important to women and everyone who knows and loves a woman, what would you like to see coming forward from the Biden administration in this space?
Ooh, that's a good question. What would I like to see the Biden administration? Biden administration definitely has me on my toes. I guess I would just want to keep seeing more female voices being brought into the fold. I don't want to see women's programs lose any funding. If anything, they need to have more. And I think that there needs to be this serious conversation about just reproductive sexual health that doesn't have anything about, any type of political agenda, because Planned Parenthood will bring different dynamics into it. It's like, let's just create something that is specific to the health of young boys and young girls. How do we want to teach that in a school that does have religious, restrictions because they want to, keep that abstinence only type of way of thinking? It's just, how can we bring in, from a biology standpoint, a way to teach young boys and young girls about themselves, their bodies, their health? That's really the biggest part of it. Women especially need to know more about their anatomy so that they can better converse with their doctors. And then I know this is a little extreme. A lot of people have talked about it recently about, men shouldn't be gynecologists. I don't want to say we should completely restrict it, but I think that that's definitely a conversation to be had. I think a lot of women would feel more comfortable if it was, maybe female specific, or, certain aspects of those, testing and procedures were just women. Because there's a whole reason why the women don't feel comfortable going to a gynecologist, or even to a Planned Parenthood. There's just not enough women, and we just need more women everywhere.
Right, the base of equality, which is the nature of feminism. So,
Yeah.
Amira Napier, thank you so much for being here. And I just want to do a shout out. We've got the endemictimes.com. Go check out her writing because she writes about so many other topics and always from this level-headed, pragmatic, intelligent point of view. So I just love the work that you're doing. Encourage everyone to go out there. So Amira, any closing thoughts before we get out of here this morning?
Oh, just be kind, be safe, and just speak up for each other when you see something happening.
Excellent. And on that, we will get out of here. So everyone try to have a good and safe weekend. we'll see you back here Monday. And Laura, thanks for joining us this morning. Maybe you'll come back on Monday. And we'll have Andy back and all sorts of good topics coming up. So everyone, thank you for tuning in. And this is available on replay after we close out. So make sure to share it with others, and we'll see you then. Thank you.
Hair of the dog, we bout that, ayy. We in the zone, we out here, yeah. Spitting the facts, how it's supposed to be. Hair of the dog, we keeping it G. Whoa.